we're sort of in the last of the series of 4 on the land, and our first 3 have been really looking at the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Tonight we'll have a quick glance at how the issues are dealt with in the New. It'll be a bit of an overview rather than a lot of detail, but we'll look at a few passages, give us some clues, and just as a sort of reminder of where we've been over the last few weeks. Remember that, you know, the underlying 2 underlying principles really of the Bible's view of creation is that creation is good. God created the earth out and looked at it and saw that it was good, and also that the earth is the Lord's, that we are not the possessors of the earth, but God is the possessor of the earth, and we are stewards, if you like, or we have responsibilities within it, but we are not the ultimate owners of anything, any piece of land or any country or whatever. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, whatever it is in the more modern translation, I don't know. And then just a reminder right at the very beginning of the Bible, that Adam was made from dust. Adam was made from the soil, which sort of implies that we human beings are totally integrated into the biosphere, into biodiversity, that we're part of the soil. And if you remember when they were expelled from Eden, they were told, dust to dust you shall, dust you are, and to dust you will return. And we're getting feedback, I think, Graham. Yeah, that's it, thanks. And then if the earth is the Lord, then the land of Israel does not really belong to the Hebrew people. It's a gift, an inheritance, and a gift that can be taken away. And there are conditions, you know, and that righteousness, justice is really the kind of condition by which the land is possessed. And we looked at Isaiah 5, the passage around the vineyard where God looks for justice and sees bloodshed. And then we also looked at the story of Naboth's vineyard, seeing that land was sacred, it was inherited, not to be stolen or appropriated. And then we also looked at some very complex pictures of the entry into the promised land. That was a complex picture of conquest by violence, coexistence, subjection, and of competing deities. And this created a rather complicated history, which is still being lived out in contemporary world. And last week we looked at how God is the God of history as well as creation, that God is acting in exile and acting in restoration of Israel. And remember that people were taken away from Israel and lived in exile. And then this week, sort of moving on from the story of, remember I said, Walter Brueggemann, the theologian, had said that the story of the Old Testament is a story of land promised, land lost, land restored. And so today we'll try and have a look and see how does that story continue into the New Testament. And that quote, I think I shared this a few weeks ago as well, from Acts chapter 1, at the time of the ascension, when the disciples are on the mountain watching Jesus ascend, they ask him before he just departs from them. So when they come together, they ask him, Lord, is this the time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel? So clearly at the time, there was an expectation that Jesus was going to be the one who would restore the land of Israel. Jesus doesn't answer, yes, this is it. I mean, he just disappears. Okay, anything on that? Is that okay? Yep, good.
Yep.
Okay, this is from Brueggemann as well, actually. He sort of asked this kind of question. Resistance or yearning. And he has two kind of images here of Israel, which we'll return to at the end, but I'll pose the question right at the very beginning. Do you know, I mean, the Wailing Wall is the remains of, the temple in Jerusalem, when the Jews pray, and they pray yearning for Israel's restoration. The Passover prayer this year here, next year in Jerusalem. There's a kind of sense in which Jewish people are yearning for something to emerge, but actually not necessarily expecting it to happen. And then the other picture is Masada. Do you know the story of Masada? No. Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, you can see, what sort of a place it is. I mean, it was built by Herod as a fortress, and at the end of the Jewish War, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, and the remaining sort of rebels, the zealots, went and amassed here on this fortress, here, and it was held under siege by the Romans. And I think in 73 AD, the Romans overpowered the fortress, and when they entered, they found that all of the people there had committed suicide. So this was the last resistance of the people of the Zealots against the Roman Empire. There was a later rebellion, but this is seen as a kind of symbol of Jewish resistance to imperial power. So hold those two images, and then we'll return to them at the end and see how they speak.
Is that near Jerusalem, that Masada? Is that close?
I think it is, yes. I'm not too sure, to be honest. No, I'm not too sure of the geography. Do you know, Graham? I don't think it's too far away.
No, I don't really know precisely.
No.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, they escaped from Jerusalem at the end of the, when the Romans actually overcame the rebellion in Jerusalem, and they went to this place. So it can't have been too far away.
Yeah.
Check that. Yeah.
Thank you.
But it was excavated, I think, after Israel was, by do you remember the Israeli politician who used to wear a patch over his eye? Can't remember his name now.
Menachem Begin?
No.
It was Moshe Dayan.
Oh yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And he was also an archaeologist and did the excavations. He led the excavations here of Masada. Yeah, quite an impressive thing. Okay, what are we going to do next? Some notes. Just some general thoughts before we look at the passage. One is there's a kind of contradictory kind of picture in the Gospels, of Jesus in relationship to the land. On one hand, you've got this strong continuity with the Jewish identity with the land. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, David's town. The ministry begins at the River Jordan. Israel begun anew, crossing into the Promised Land again. 12 apostles, the 12 tribes of Israel. The ministry was within the sacred boundaries of the promised land, few exceptions. I mean, there are only very limited times when Jesus actually goes outside the promised land. So it was within the land rather than with the diaspora. Paul's ministry, remember, was with the diaspora rather than with the land of Israel. And there was a command to the disciples to go nowhere in the way of the Gentiles or Samaritans, but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And the enlargement of the mission beyond Israel only takes place after the resurrection. So on the one hand, you've got this sense of there being a continuity with the Hebrew Bible and the relationship with Israel. But you've also got a discontinuity. The non-Jewish Magi greet Messiah. Galilee is called Galilee of the Gentiles. It's in Isaiah as well, actually. And Jesus is followed and greeted in Syria and the Decapolis. I think that's Mark chapter 4. And ministers on the east side of the Galilee, where the Gerasene demoniac is healed. And Mark has two feeding miracles, the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000. One is on the Jewish side of the Sea of Galilee, and the other on the Gentiles. So there's a kind of discontinuity as well taking place. So it kind of begs the question, why? Oh, no, stop sharing. Why does Jesus have his ministry in Galilee and not Jerusalem? Remembering that Galilee is not quite, as pure, if that's the right word, as Judah, as the area around Jerusalem, because it was a lot more foreigners after the Assyrian deportation, after then in the Maccabean era, so many Greeks came in that there was a Jewish army of 3,000 troops came in to purify the land and kill thousands of Gentiles and transfer, the remaining Jews to the south. So, in just 100 years or so prior to this, that there'd been this movement of peoples, and that the area was seen to be too Gentile. And there were some Greek cities quite close to where Jesus was, notably Sepphoris. And if you remember in the synagogue, when Jesus goes to preach in the synagogue in Luke chapter 4, he quotes from Isaiah, but the messianic text, but then he goes and makes that reference to Elijah, who was sent to the widow in Zarephath, and to Elisha, to Naaman. So you've got this kind of interesting mix here in the gospel of how much Jesus is identified totally with the Jewish story and the Jewish land and the land of Israel, and how much he's kind of undermining that story at the same time. Any thoughts about that?
Wants to be a bit mixed, doesn't he? He wants his audience to be a bit mixed rather than the same sort of people all the time.
Yeah. He's certainly, starting in Galilee is a really interesting thing for a Jewish Messiah. But he goes to the temple and he observes the festivals. He goes to the synagogue. Any thoughts on that, or should we? You don't have to have thoughts on it.
Well, it's reading the Old Testament, you do come across the feeling that the land of the Old Testament is still very fragmented, and that there were obviously a lot of people who were very invested in the temple, but there were also people who weren't. And And so, you know, the no, I mean, I think the fact, you know, the fact that Jesus locates himself outside of Jerusalem quite a lot of the time is something we ought to take seriously, and we ought to view it as, you know, as sort of part of the complexity of life in those times.
And yeah, I've lost train of thought, but I mean, yes, I mean, even in people at the time would question the legitimacy of the temple as well. There were certainly some people who felt that the restored temple was not a legitimate temple. I mean, this was Herod's temple, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And its legitimacy, you know, was in question. And I guess, you know, in the book of Hebrews, it says, therefore we go to him outside the camp. There is that sense of Jesus being outside, you know, seen as a person who's outside of the, you know, the mainstream of the society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, look at us, we're Congregationalists. And if we think of the, you know, the Anglican viewpoint, then the Anglican viewpoint is is very much centered around Westminster Abbey or whatever. And we're not. But if, you know, archaeologists from the future started reading about us, well, you know, they would begin to worry, you know, they would probably think we were, you know, oriented around Westminster Abbey as everybody else was.
Or Union Chapel, you know, they'd excavate Union Chapel and think, wow, these people must have been packed out every Sunday.
Yes.
This ornate building, you know, they must have been so rich, you know.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, let me just share a passage then. Let's have a look at the passage from Scripture, if I can find it. Probably there. Yeah. This is. Let's just read this. I mean, we've remembering that, you know, how we've looked at the various stories. Now this is a different one, but okay, let's just have a read of this. Somebody want to just read us that? I'll go on to Meek.
I have gone off mute. But you didn't go on mute. You muted me, and then I went off. Wait, there we go. Okay, right. So Luke 13, 6 through 9. Parable of the barren fig tree. Then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit on it and found none. So he said to the gardener, see here, for 3 years I have come looking for fruit on this fig tree, and still I find none. Cut it down. Why should it be wasting the soil? He replied, Sir, let it alone for 1 more year, until I dig round it and put manure on it. If it bears fruit next year, well and good, but if not, you can cut it down.
I mean, just remembering Isaiah chapter 5, and that Israel is the vineyard, and that Jesus is, you know, talking to his own country people at the time of occupation and all kinds of challenges. How do you interpret this parable?
It's not resolved in any way.
Yeah, I mean, go on.
You know, it's a bit you know, it's a bit like those Zen Buddhist tales, the koans, which likewise don't, you know, don't get anywhere. And this is, you know, I mean, it doesn't say what happens next year.
Right. So there's a kind of implication there that almost a kind of if you don't behave yourself, if things don't change, if there isn't a transformation, then you know. So it's a kind of warning, isn't it? A kind of prophetic warning to people.
There is a saying we have in English. I'm not sure if it's biblical in origin. I need to look that up. But all things come to those who wait.
Yeah. What do you think is going to come to them?
Death.
Death. Well, I mean, it's kind of, you know, there it is. I mean, the owner of the fig tree is looking for fruit, you know, and Israel is the vineyard. So where is the fruit? You know, where is the response of the people? And the 3 years, you know, I mean, we know that period of 3 years is seen to be Jesus' own ministry, isn't it? I mean, it's and cutting it down, you know, why should it waste the soil almost? You know, why should the land be wasted on this fig tree that isn't bearing fruit? I mean, it's got so many resonances of the Hebrew Bible and Ezekiel and Isaiah who keep referring to Israel as a vineyard which is, you know, is failing to deliver. So yeah, I mean, it kind of begs the question whether or not, to me, I mean, that Jesus is standing in the kind of tradition of the Old Testament prophets who are raising this kind of question about the legitimacy of Israel as, you know, the servant of God, if it's not actually able to deliver, and is this promised land, you know, the land that God wants it to be. So it's kind of carrying on the kind of same kind of message. Do you think, or am I barking up the wrong tree? Am I barking up about a fig tree? Okay. So I mean, we've got this sense now that Jesus is raising that kind of question about the same prophetic question that comes from there. But we also have to remember that this is a country that is occupied, you know, by the Romans. So this has a, you know, huge implication for the ministry of Jesus. This is a time when the land, the sacred land, the promised land of Israel, the inherited land, the inheritance of Abraham, the promised land promised to Abraham, the covenant, the land that is given in covenant is actually occupied by another power, an idolatrous power, and quite a brutal power. So how are they going to? How does Jesus react to that? And I think at the time there are kind of three possible ways in which people reacted. One was kind of cooperation with Rome, the Pax Romana, and you see Herod and his dynasty, you know, totally aligned and cooperating with the Romans. The second is a kind of separation. You know, we know the Qumran, where the alternative communities, Dead Sea scrolls and all that. John the Baptist may be in the wilderness, people who kind of separated themselves. And then the resistance, you know, the people who refused to pay taxes, some references to that. People who took the guerrilla action, who actually caught the Romans, so in the sense in which the Judean leaders had to either capitulate to the occupation or to organize to defeat it. And then the question is, where does Jesus fit in that kind of spectrum of responses to the occupation of the land by a foreign power? And that's a big question, but let's have a look at a passage and see if it gives us any clues. Matthew chapter 8. What was that? 5 to 13. There we go. Let's have a look and see if this gives us any kind of clues. Remembering that Jesus is, operating in this dangerous environment, this quite difficult environment. Who's going to go with this?
Want I do this one?
Yeah.
When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, appealing to him and saying, Lord, my servant is lying at home, paralyzed in terrible distress. And he said to him, I will come and cure him. The centurion answered, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only speak the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and the slave does it. When Jesus heard him, he was amazed, and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, in no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west, and will eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion, Jesus said, go, let it be done for you according to your faith. And the servant was healed in that hour.
Wow, where does that one take us? Does it give us any ideas, any clues into how Jesus is responding, reacting?
Well, he's not following the same old territorial rules at all, is he? And he's not subverting the political order as it is at the time. So, he doesn't say, well, I can't do it because you're a Roman. I'm not having anything to do with you unless you stop being a Roman or stop being an occupier. He works within the system, but then he also kind of subverts it from within, doesn't he? In that, well, he breaks other rules. He breaks the rules of resistance, and ignores them, really. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I think it's just that he's not bound by anything particularly.
Doesn't fall into any simple.
No.
Does it? I mean, nowhere in Israel have I found such faith. But then, go on, Andy. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, this represents a widening of faith, that it's open for everybody, not just a select few.
Definitely.
But it's also open to those who haven't yet expressed faith. Because this man can't, the centurion can't have been to a synagogue and worshipped in a synagogue.
It's possible that he did.
Oh, okay, sorry.
It is possible. And there were people who were in Luke, in Acts rather, we read of the God-fearing Gentiles, who are sort of people who are interested in following Judaism they are described as God-fearing. Cornelius, isn't it, in Acts chapter 10 is described as God-fearing.
Yes, But this man is a senior officer in an occupying army.
Yeah.
And so he wouldn't have been accepted anywhere, would he, easily, where Jewish people were? You know, he just wouldn't dare really to go in there, presumably, cause a riot. So I think my point is that whether it's deliberate or not, that basically Jesus interacts with someone who is the worst of the worst, as far as most people around him are concerned. And I'm trying to think of a modern equivalent. I can't. I mean, well, I don't know.
Well, I mean, you could take a Russian soldier in Ukraine at the moment.
Well,
you know,
yes. Yes.
But I mean, in a way, it's a kind of an act of parable. You know, as the miracles tend to be, an act of parable of the teaching of Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's chapter 8 of Matthew. Chapter 5, we read, you know, love your enemies. We read, you know, go the extra mile. You know, and you know, the Roman soldiers were able to press people in to carry their burden for a mile. And Jesus says, go on to the extra mile. You know, so he's got a distinctive, almost civil disobedience kind of pacifist kind of approach to the occupation, which kind of shames, you know, shames the occupier, but it also shames the people of Israel as well. Nowhere in Israel have I found such faith.
But he doesn't require this man to change anything about his behavior. In fact, he reinforces it by saying, you know, well, this is great what you're saying, because you're talking about authority. I can see you get it, and carry on, really, basically what you're doing. And he basically saying to those who would have thought, well, surely you should be saying to us we're the right people. He's saying, actually, you've got it completely wrong. It's your enemy you should be listening to. So that's a bit like saying to a Russian general in an occupied part of Ukraine, in the hearing of all the Ukrainians there, this guy's got it right.
But then at the very end there, it says, go let it be done according to your faith. So he actually says that the centurion has faith.
Like what? We don't know.
Faith in what? Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this thing here about many will come from east and west,
Yes.
and eat with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
But the heirs of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness.
Yeah.
So it is
All the
also
refugees, all the refugees, asylum seekers can come. They'll be welcomed in.
So he is kind of challenging the ethno-nationalism, if you like, you know, of that comes out of the kind of idea of the promised land. You know, this is ours, and you know, we can't do anything wrong because it's ours. It kind of challenges that.
It's worse than that, though. I mean, this is really it's. If I was one of the crowd around him, I'd be really angry at this. How dare you say they're better than me? Look at what they're doing to us. It almost feels like he's supporting injustice.
Yes. Actually, what he's supporting is the compassion of the centurion. You know? Yeah. He's supporting this concern for, you know, the servant who is lying there, you know, at home paralyzed. And there may be something symbolic in the servant lying at home paralyzed, you know, servant Israel, you know, as well, you know, in terrible distress. I mean, it's a lot you can read into this.
Yes, but the centurion obviously expects some absolute obedience from his subordinates.
Yeah.
he describes it.
Mm.
And and that's not a surprise, because after all, this is the military.
Mm.
Yeah, and recognizing then the authority of Jesus, isn't it? And that's a big issue in the gospel. What is the authority of Jesus? By what authority does Jesus do these things?
Yes.
And we know the answer. His authority comes from God.
Yeah, but I think we often, and because faith is a sort of technical term in Christian theology. We expect every use of the word faith in the New Testament to have exactly the same meaning, but it's faith could obviously mean just trustworthiness in
Oh yeah.
sort of ordinary sense. So
Yeah.
and I think that passage leaves us a bit leaves us asking questions of ourselves about what our faith means and how it's related to the other concepts like trustworthiness or whatever.
Yeah.
And clearly faithfulness was, is the kind of underlying expectation, of Israel. Israel is called to be faithful to the covenant.
Yeah.
Let's just move on from this a little bit. I want us to just remember a key phrase that Jesus uses in the Beatitudes: "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." If we think of the meek as, not just people who are submissive or unassertive, but people who are humble in the sense of being oppressed, people who have been humble. And I just want to, blessed are, just read this little passage from Psalm 37, which is the kind of background to that little phrase. Do you want to read it? No.
No, kind of.
Your voice.
You'll go, Harley.
I go. It's just us two tonight. Of David, do not fret because of the wicked. Do not be envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good, so you will live in the land and enjoy security. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. He will make your vindications shine like the light, and the justice of your cause like the noonday. Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Do not fret over those who prosper in their way, over those who carry out evil devices. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret. It leads only to evil. For the wicked shall be cut off. For those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. Yet a little while, and the wicked will be no more. Though you look diligently for their place, they will not be there. Oh, can't see the rest of it.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. But the meek shall inherit the land and delight in abundant prosperity.
So Jesus is quoting that in the Beatitudes: "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the land and delight in abundant prosperity." It's sort of, and it's a really interesting little opening to this psalm. It's quite a long psalm. The evildoers, the wicked ones, will fade like grass. Trust in the Lord, do good, so you live in the land and enjoy security. This is all about who is going to be part of a prosperous Israel. Take delight in the Lord, commit your way to the Lord, and the justice of your cause like the noonday. Be still before the Lord, wait patient for him, and so on. Beautiful words, and then ends with this: "But the meek shall inherit the land and delight in abundant prosperity." And it kind of, I mean, it's almost, you know, saying that the land is inherited not by just generally the people, but it is inherited by a certain group of people. You know, it belongs to the people who have been oppressed, the people who have been humbled, the people who have been put down in different ways. And this is, I mean, quite an important choice of words that Jesus, you know, makes from the psalm.
I remember the way that Reverend Cleves put this at one of the Nottingham study weekends a couple of years ago. He emphasized that when Jesus was speaking, he was speaking in Aramaic. And if you translate that directly across, the blessed are prefix is not passive, it's active. It translates as, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, and that makes it, I mean, it makes that statement really quite provocative, doesn't it, in the Beatitudes then? And I think, you know, what is this? Jesus proclaiming the kingdom, you know, the kingdom of God. What does that translate into, you know, this immediacy of the time in which Jesus is living, where the land of Israel is occupied, and the kingship, the Caesarship, you know, the emperor, you know, is in a very different kind of place. And Jesus is, you know, all the time, you know, he's respecting Jerusalem, he's respecting the temple, but he's calling for its cleansing. He cleanses the temple. He predicts its destruction, which is totally inconsistent with the zealot movement, you know, the movement for revolutionary change. And yet his notion of the kingdom is about a complete reversal, you know, a reversal of everything. And I wonder if we might just kind of reflect a little bit towards the end now. I mean, you might have things to say, but what happens beyond the resurrection as well? You remember in Acts chapter 2, you know, that list of people who were there at Pentecost from the diaspora. And you know the passage, I mean, that one that you only hope that no one's going to give you to read on Pentecost Sunday, you know.
Or the list of people.
Yeah. You know, Parthians, Medes, Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea, and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the parts of Libya belong to Cyrene, and visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, you know. So this is this group of people. And actually, whether or not, and it's the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, who are the kind of cradle of the Christian movement. There is definitely a Christian community in Jerusalem. James is martyred in 60 something, 63, 64, I think. But Paul and the movement outwards is towards this diaspora. And you might ask the question whether or not what is going on through the teaching of Jesus, but in the expansion of the church, is a movement away from the notion of Israel as the promised land into, and the temple as being the central point, into a different focal point. And maybe it was not bad news at all for the Jewish diaspora, for the people living outside of Jerusalem, who weren't as committed to the promised land, to the land of Israel, as the people resident there. And actually, it gave, what Jesus does is give a whole new lease of life to belief in the law and the Jewish God and the Jewish ways, by disconnecting, the kingdom from the physical land. Does that make any sense to you at all? And there's nothing in the letters. There's nothing in the letters, or from there onwards. There's nothing that then talks about, the land, the promised land, and so on. So there are allusions to it all the way through. But there's nothing, now we're going to get this land back. This is not going to be restored. It was something else. It was moving it out beyond. Am I talking sense or nonsense?
So is it the idea that all land can be promised land? So the kind of the idea of the early Christians in this country, you would, and I know this is possibly going further than was meant, but you would go to the wildest places and kind of claim them for God. That it was all land could be sacred. So, for example, years ago I went to the Skellig Islands off the west coast of Ireland, which is like one of the wildest places you could choose to set up a monastery, but they did because it was claiming it for God, and it was saying this is sacred land as well. So rather than seeing a kind of limited place as the promised land, all the world is promised land.
Yes.
Is that where this is heading?
Yes, and I think I remember heard a Jewish rabbi talking about it. He was saying that Israel was making a big mistake by investing its future in the land of Israel because it could fail. And you invest your belief, your hope in the physical land and in victory, a kind of military victory or a political victory. Whereas I think what happens with Jesus is that the future of the kingdom, the future of the temple, does not lie in the bricks and mortar of the temple in Jerusalem, and the future of the kingdom does not lie within the boundaries of Israel as the promised land, but the future lies within the new temple, the temple of the heart, the temple of the body of Christ. This something which transcends physical land, but actually is more of a kind of virtual kingdom, if you like, modern way of putting it, if that makes sense. I'll put it another way. I'll put it this way. Revelation 5, 6 to 14. And I will read it, spare you having to argue with each other. And then I saw between the throne and the 4 living creatures, and among the elders, the Lamb, standing as if it had been slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits God sent out into all the earth. He went and took the scroll from the right hand of the one who was seated on the throne. When he had taken the scroll, 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell before the Lamb, each holding a harp and a golden bowl of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. They sang a new song. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seal. For you were slaughtered by your blood, you ransomed for God saints from every tribe. See it. By your blood, you ransomed for God saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests serving our God, and they shall reign on the earth. Then I looked and I heard the voice of many angels surrounding the throne and the living creatures and the elders. They numbered myriads and myriads, thousands and thousands, singing with full voice. Worthy is the Lamb that was slaughtered to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory. Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea and all that is in them singing to the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. And the 4 living creatures said, Amen, and the elders fell down and worshipped. I mean, it's you can see how this, I mean, Revelation is that full of, kind of visions of the temple and so on and so on, but just who is it talking about? And it's very cryptic language, For you were slaughtered by your blood, you were ransomed for God, saints from every tribe and language and people and nation. It just completely undermines that everlasting. It's opened it out, the possibility of the new temple, the new is there. And I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and in the sea. So that whole new creation is crazy. I don't know if that sort of helps or not. Just see how the vision has opened out from the narrow view of Israel as the promised land into something which is more universal and open.
Mm.
So is it completely wrong for Israel to be seeking to have its own nation at the moment?
Well, I think that's the implication of it, isn't it? I mean, I think this is the real challenge for Christians, because
Yes.
this is where we don't know where to sit. On one hand, we feel very, very critical of Israel and its occupation and Palestine and so on. On the other hand, we have got so much guilt from the Holocaust and past mistreatments, and we're in this double bind, I think, as to know what to say in answer to that question. But as I say, I mean, there are Jewish writers, and Jewish theologians who would say just what you have said, Neil. That this is a mistake, and that Israel is the people, is the body of people, just as we would say, the church is the body of Christ, and not a building or whatever.
And yet there are so many Christians who talk about the fact that Israel must be restored as a nation ahead of the second coming. I mean, I never quite understood that anyway, but that it to not believe that is almost to go against Christian heritage, to think otherwise.
Yeah.
It's in America, it's a frighteningly big movement. It drives government policy, for goodness sake. It's scary.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Orthodox Jewish friends of mine would make the point that Israel won't be complete until everyone has made aliyah and reunited in Israel, and the only person to gather all the Jews together in Israel will be Jesus on the second coming.
I mean, I don't know I don't know whether I just don't feel I want to buy into those kind of theories, really. Seems to me that the kind of this thing which Brueggemann put in his question he asked, are we locking into the spirituality of the Wailing Wall or of the resistance in Masada? Is this all or nothing? Israel have this land that's and that's it. We possess this and own this, and we will fight to the death to keep it. Or is it about yearning for something more, something more spiritual, something that is about knowing that God has, and believing that God has invested in Israel, which we do, but Israel as a clan, Israel as a people, Israel as a new revived covenant, the new covenant in the blood of Christ.
It's just mind-blowing. I mean, in a good way.
Yeah.
Because it always sat uncomfortably with me, this idea that Israel had to be restored and stuff everyone else around it. That just didn't fit with the God that I knew.
Yeah.
But
I-
it's a totem, if I can put it that way. It's almost a false idol, isn't it? I think for many Christians that it's that Israel has to be restored.
I mean, I think there's something about recognizing certain political realities, you know, and finding a different settlement, a different way of Israel-Palestine coexisting. I mean, I think, you know, there's something about peace settlement, you know. You can't undo the history of the past 70 years, whatever it was. But
well, that's where the story of the centurion is so profound, isn't it? Because Jesus isn't saying there, right, you've got to undo everything, you know, sorry, you shouldn't be a centurion anymore, you got to stop doing that, then I'll heal you. And he even lets the guy talk about slavery and he doesn't challenge it. So, you know, it's not changing political systems, but it's
accepting.
Yeah, that's it, Sue, thank you.
and how you be within those.
Yes.
And how you behave within those, you know, how you respond within them.